wanted to volume up. Record this. So I feel like it's a problem a lot of people have. I've seen it around the country in like big cities, smaller ones, the really big ones, well organized ones don't have it as much. But the lack of democratic decision making, something that debilitates our movements, the involvement, the turnout, the speakers, like everything. It's something we've come up with or we've come across locally that if I'm going to address, the reasons are the same everywhere, pretty much everywhere. It takes different forms, but I think it comes down to something I read in Museum of Protest, Guides for Decision Making. Basically, how to. There was one page on bridging conflict and one on democratic decision making that I'd never seen before, and I thought were super dope. But the issue comes down to like the eternal issue that you see in a lot of different places, a lot of different like contexts and poverty interventions, international countries, where basically there's like a dominant culture that is in leadership of whatever activist group, coalition, project, and typically that dominant group is so locally, like in the context, financial, political, everything. Um, when there's that majority culture that is also seen in our organizations, it turns off or it can turn off folks from different backgrounds because they don't share that culture or they don't share the values and we're operating in a way that assumes everyone thinks the same way. We often all do this. Um, we basically have to create structures to ensure that it doesn't happen by getting organized and having a process that is allowing us to navigate these differences that can facilitate conversation when there's a conflict and turn it into a situation that benefits us in the long term instead of destroying or hurting a coalition or building resentment or whatever. Um, One of the top ones that came up was something that I used to believe like years ago that I don't know, just like a product of let me change the tag of this. I think it's like a byproduct, just public education systems, but seeing Martin Luther King Jr. as a movement leader who like embraced quietness, so that was powerful. That's how either he won or what he was known for. But it's pretty much exact opposite. He like one more step over, and then another step over is like Malcolm X, very simplified terms. And this is probably most clear in letter from Birmingham jail, the famous letter that he penned. And that is basically addressing people, he addresses moderates, where they're urging him for like more respectful dialogue, negotiation. And his point is that it is moral to force conversation and negotiation when people aren't paying attention to an issue or they think we resolved using less bold action, and especially when those folks aren't the ones that are suffering like direct state violence, like abuse by police, are killed in wars or whatever it may be, or are being targeted by ICE currently. And let's see that context. Let me just Google it. It's great because he grounds it in like the moral arguments that he has, not the moral arguments, but like the religious background and context and things that we learn in like Christian school about different stories and the values behind them, people demanding justice. Always a letter from jail.com. I am looking for text version and not PDFs. There we go. He basically says, I usually don't respond to criticism. That's all I would be doing. Oh wow, my cat's going to be very demanding. Why am I, or like, you're an outsider. And he's like, we have the coalition and has, a chapter here, and we use our resources everywhere. So sometimes that means staff coming in cities, but that he is here because injustice is here, religious reference. He's compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown and towards this call for aid. And that these problems are interconnected. You can't sit in Atlanta while stuff happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Put on my speaker voice. Hide in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. We can deplore demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations, the protests. I'm sure that none of you would want to rest content with a kind of superficial social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It's unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place here, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's power structure left us behind with no alternative. Paraphrasing. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 steps: collection of facts to get an idea, to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. This is a real racial injustice. Birmingham is one of the most segregated cities, unfair treatment in the courts, brutality, bombings, more than anywhere else in the nation. And we tried to negotiate with city folks, but they refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Basically saying that we protested because there was a market force here. People were buying stuff in a certain. Later on, he says that this is. He came to talk with business leaders. Promises were made, like racial signs, like whites only or whatever. We had promises. We decided to stop demonstration and protesting because of that. And as the weeks went by, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise, and the signs returned. Hopes have been blasted and disappointment settled upon us. We had no alternative except for direct action, where we present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification, workshops on nonviolence, and we're making sure that we're disciplined, that people don't lash out or react. And we decided on the season for Easter, big shopping period, and that a strong economic withdrawal program, like consumer boycott, would be the product of direct action. Knowing that this would happen, people stopped buying stuff. We felt this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. They're the ones causing it. This is literally direct action, affecting the people that are causing the problem. It occurred to us, mayoral election, we postponed. And why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and forth? These are disruptive forms of action. Isn't negotiation a better path? Because you can you're right for calling for negotiation. This is the very purpose of direct action. It seeks to create a crisis and foster tension in the community and has constantly refused to negotiate. They are then forced to confront the issue, so it dramatizes an issue that can no longer be ignored. Creating the tension on as part of the work of nonviolent may sound shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of tension. The word tension. I've earnestly opposed violent tension, but there's a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth, just as Socrates felt that it was necessary for tension in the mind of an individual, so that an individual could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal. So we must see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. So he's forcing negotiation by being tense enough. That means that you're pissing people off, especially the decision makers, like people that could say yes. And he's saying that, yes, I believe in negotiation. We need it for real and not, this bad faith negotiation where you can actually come to a real solution. You're just there to tell us why you can't do something. So too long have we been dragged down in a tragic effort to live in a monologue rather than dialogue. This ideal, empty promises. He's asked, why didn't you give us time to act? And he points out that basically we need to fight whoever is in charge. Our elected decision makers need to feel the pressure of people power, regardless. Like, there's not going to be we wait, new person is elected and they change everything, especially for deep-seated, long-term issues that are especially driven by prejudice and hate. But this person is a little bit best bad. They're both segregationists, dedicated to the status quo. We have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. It is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who are not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. The point of this is that impacted communities have it by being impacted and screwed over by whatever system that we're protesting, are wanting more bold action more quickly, that people that aren't directly screwed over by these situations are going to want something less tense, less controversial, like whatever it may be, less bold, because it's not an urgent threat to their life. It's something that they might agree with ideologically. And that material impact and degradation of your life is what's going to drive campaigns to be more powerful. It's going to create better movements. We root our issues in like a specific harm, a specific community that's like geographically bounded, rather than activists across the city. You need to talk about people that are being screwed over, communities that are being ruined, water supplies being poisoned. The impact has to be centered for people to have the boldness, as well as the commitment level, to be able to achieve something in the long term. And sometimes people come across campaigns where, the commitment level of people that are volunteer, activists from across the community, a few dozen across the city, might seem more committed, and that's usually because they're being sidelined, or might seem less committed. They are volunteer folks who have the free time and seem like they get more done and impact communities less, but that's often when the impacted community and the folks that are affected the most aren't involved in decision making because they're feeling sidelined, silenced, ignored. They're not doing things that they want to do or that they really truly believe in, so they just stop participating. And what happens is the leading dominant culture in the organizations that are trying to wage a campaign using a little bit more respectful terms or less bold or more quiet or more whatever. They're upholding their assumptions in culture as if they're true for everyone, as if everyone agrees. And people from different cultures that are in smaller groups that are minorities or historically marginalized and exploited, they're just turned off by it because they don't see a path for their voices to be truly listened and maybe they don't always speak up and fight relentlessly in a meeting. Sometimes they just don't come back, and that happens constantly. This is why we build the structures within our movements to be able to catch the stuff when it's happening and provide and force basically the conversation that needs to be had so that we can do better in the future, so that we can be stronger together, bigger, wider coalitions, more people involved, more people offering their perspectives. All of that makes us stronger than us trying to uphold the status quo of what we're used to. Because our situation is in the status quo. It's usually not going to be saved without a change in the local balance of power, the permission structure, the whatever leadership needs to be shaken up. Things are rarely changed in a serious transformative way, like a changing your material day-to-day life. Like you are no longer worried about healthcare or housing for at a community-wide scale. We don't make that kind of change without bothering people, without other folks saying like, "Oh, I'm no longer in charge." Like the business community that may oppose a homeless shelter permit, or whatever that might have to deal with higher taxes to fund free school meals. But the children that then don't have to worry about going to school hungry get to live better lives. Everything changes for them in a significant way. And the bothersome parts that affect the people that were already in power, people that were benefiting from the status quo, are like gadfly bites. They're not life threatening. They do piss you off though, because you're not used to that. You're not used to being prodded and pushed in such a way. And typically people will leave or just not participate without their voices being listened to, without seeing the changes they want to see, without feeling a part of the process, or without feeling meaningful action. So if we have like an activist network, happens in a lot of places, led by folks with the free time, with like the financial status to care about taking action on an issue as valuable in itself without actually having to change the situation, without having to actually make the community safer in like a serious way. That's going to often be people that are more elites, that are more privileged, and that happens with World Bank programs in Yemen or Malawi or whatever, where if you want it to be community based and you send in professionals and you're looking for people that can help lead a program, people with the free time and that speak English that could come up to like the European staff, they're probably going to be local elites. And then they dominate decision making and they also capture the resources and benefits. They might make a well that's closer to their houses and friends' houses than it is to people that most need it or that have to walk the furthest. And the people that are already struggling the most typically don't have the free time to go out of the way to participate in these efforts. That's why we try to make them inclusive, is that we force their participation as like a necessary component of us having a protest or an action, a demonstration, a rally, whatever, about a particular issue. If we don't force ourselves to have inclusive decision making, we inevitably slip into the status quo and letting the dominant culture kind of run the show. We do things as we've always done because it's more comfortable for the people in charge, which is a natural driving force and not some like major hate-filled thing. It's just how we all operate. We want to do things the way we're used to. But if that results in weaker organizations, weaker movements, smaller actions, struggling to get the right speakers, and the attendees being heavily demographically skewed towards a certain way, and not having the right power and like visual and having a truly rainbow coalition and having proper diversity that reflects the local area and especially reflects the people that are most affected, then we weaken ourselves and we basically do it to make ourselves feel better, be the ones that are plugged in or involved or taking action, because that's now giving us a social reward in the past 10 years. It's when activism has come in vogue. So these are eternal issues that Martin Luther King Jr. was writing about. Some what, 60 years ago plus now, that we have here in the United States, like in our activist organizations that also apply to like nonprofits. It happens in international poverty programs run by government institutions that have like really strict rules about doing things the right way. And for us, what we do is we adopt principles of inclusive decision, democratic decision. It doesn't matter if we have, you know, a majority of votes, whatever. Like that's not a full democracy if a lot of people are being screwed over constantly, and especially if we have the deliberating body being skewed one way, especially towards that dominant culture locally, because inevitably they're going to control and do things their own way. Inclusive decision making forces us to be able to center the voices of the people most impacted, because otherwise it's not worth hosting events. It may seem like it to us, but in the long run, it doesn't make the difference we need because it doesn't involve the people we need. Martin Luther King Jr. talks about the struggles that we all see. The limitations placed on affecting communities. And he points out that like we're not screwed over by the system in such a direct and overwhelming way. It's easy for us to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of our folks smothered in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you find suddenly your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you try to explain to your young daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has been advertised on TV, see her cry, tears welling up, and told that Funtown is closed to the colored and children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her mental sky, and her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards the dominant culture. We have to concoct an answer for 5 year olds who's asking, why do they treat us so badly? And on in these struggles that he's able to visualize and show and get the reader to imagine. Living constantly at a tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, plagued with inner fears and other resentments, when you're forever fighting gener- degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. It was brilliant because it throws the reader to the shoes. People that struggle this by forcing them to imagine by effective reading. Comes a time when a cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope you can understand our legitimate, unavoidable impatience. And this is about breaking laws, which is not quiet, respectful action that's disruptive. It's seizing space because you have the people who are no longer complying and participating in a system that's screwing them over and demanding a better deal. Quoting St. Thomas Aquinas back from like nearly 1,000 years ago, points out that what Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. The legality is not a source of morality. That parading without permits, there's nothing wrong with having an ordinance that requires it. but an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation that denies citizens the privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. And there's nothing new about this. These disruptive tactics have been used for millennia. And he says, though, first, that he's not advocating evading defying the law that would lead to anarchy, that when we take direct action in civil disobedience that does break the law, but to do so openly, lovingly, and with willingness to accept the penalty. An individual that does civil disobedience, which is not even allowed, like the No Kings agreements, because they are nonprofits which have the legal status and then can be cracked down on. That's the limitation of nonprofits. But an individual who breaks the law that conscience tells him is unjust, who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over the injustice, is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. It's taking it seriously. Instead of ignoring it, not engaging with it, appreciating it. Because you're not trying to run away from it. And again, this is nothing new. Evidence sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar, the ground that a higher moral law is at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and excruciating chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. Now, one thing that we've apparently decided not to do, which most people want to, in the No Kings movement, and not just here locally where I'm at, but across the country, is to not march with, to do things without a permit. In a big city, you can't really have a normal gathering because it literally shuts down the streets with so many people. You want them to like move so that the rest of traffic can move around. But and you always want some level of people power that hits the wideness. Just having so many people that it spills over into the streets so that there's a legitimate reason for occupying some space. Not to say that disruptive tactics using a smaller team are always unethical or something. Every strategy has to be considered. Everyone that doesn't deny humanity needs to be legitimately considered, but that we do better when we have a large enough crowd, when especially people cannot see the end, when it's a sea of people, when they can tell that a community is not enjoying what's going on. So apparently we've all decided, by taking part in No Kings, that we'll never engage in civil disobedience, which is an inherent limiter being placed on us. And this is something that we just have to know that larger nonprofits nationwide just cannot endorse openly. That's why all the rapid response stuff is a very legal, whatever. The most like aggressive thing that I've ever seen an organization even refer to is deportation defense, and specifically circles of protection when ICE is coming for a certain house to bring activists to the doorstep and literally form a circle around it so that the only way agents get in is by forcing themselves past people. And that's not even a common thing. It's just something that radical activists do in larger cities or more well organized places. But if we want to make the change and actually stop this now army that has more money than Marines and the Russian military, we have to employ whatever tactics work. And of course, that starts with rapid response and just verifying, alerting people when there are agents in town at a large scale, bringing everyone in, pointing out that you really can't refuse to be a part of this. You can do it, you can refuse in whichever way, to make a way that works for you, but completely abandon the concept of warning your neighbors. It needs to not be a norm. I'm sure there's some reasons here or there that will make it, but 95% of people should not be running away from a community warning itself that there's an imminent danger so that people can have a heads up. This doesn't mean you have to share a Facebook post publicly. In case you're worried about backlash, you can send it to people directly. You can send it to group chats. You can post with limitations so it's privately. You can do whichever way. You can tell your neighbor in person. You can tell the grocery store worker, heads up, ISIS in town. There's so many different ways to participate in this. You can check Facebook pages without being logged in, without it being recorded. You can download Tor browser and use, DuckDuckGo, Privacy Essentials on Firefox, and Privacy Blocker and Ghostery and stuff, so that your fingerprint isn't being watched around the internet in case you're super concerned about that stuff, which most of us are nowhere near being on the radar of federal agents that are tracking that kind of stuff. They're mostly concerned about people that try to directly impede, they try to obstruct, which is, its own action thing, but we're talking about rapid response, and that's just alerts and knowing that they're in town. And people will pitch things like a general strike, but there's no way we're getting to that level of ensuring it happens without building organizational capacity at the ground, of connecting people. We can't go for that stuff without making sure it happens, because if we say it's happening and the people don't participate, we dramatically weaken our position. Doesn't mean it's always not going to be worth a try, but we're at like 10% of the population that is unionized. We peaked at like 30 in somewhere 1940s to 50s. According to Eric Smiley in The Future We Need, Organizing for a Better Democracy in the 21st Century, 2022 book with Sarita Gupta. Our labor movement needs a revival to get there, and the reason why our labor movement died off and atrophied is at its current state, as Jane McElvey points out. No shortcuts. It's like one of the number one books about organizing is that our unions started to professionalize. They began to center these professional class folks that either weren't the workers or became separate from them. And that we didn't center the decision making by including the workers themselves, the regular working people, being able to have a say how their organization, their union was run, something that destroyed our strength, because when people check out of their organization's decision making, they don't take part in it, they don't feel ownership over it. That means they don't live up to it if there's a right to work law passed. So by bringing people into decision making, especially centering the affected community, we strengthen ourselves for the long haul. So we need to do that and fix that in our labor unions, which in a lot of them is still going to be using the new labor ethos, as Jane calls it, the late Jane. We need to do that in our movements as well. We need to do it in our rapid response networks, our No Kings coalitions. And the biggest issue with Indivisible as an organization is that they really did a free-for-all, start your own chapter, whatever approach, which makes sense starting out. But now there's so many groups out there, some of which aren't serious about elections and like how they make decisions and being democratic in that, where the dominant culture then makes people not want to take part, especially working people, young folks, people of color, people in marginalized communities with other struggles, because they know the folks that are making the decisions don't have the same experiences of them and are leading the conversation by assuming everyone else cares or agrees with them, and that they're not going to be able to have their voice truly heard, because likely they've seen it happen when they've tried to participate. A lot of people then, they're going to tell these folks aren't listening to us. And then a lot of the people do not participate. And this is what's causing the diversity crisis within the No Kings movement, within Indivisible, within union leadership around the country, within even like communist and socialist organizations. That's why they swing so white, is because they are more ideological, and working people and marginalized communities They want to take part in something that's just expressing their views. They want to see their lives made better. They need to see their lives made better because participating in it and losing out on rent money, threatening your personal situation, to have political expression is simply not worth it. So none of these things get fixed until we address at our core whether or not we are being democratic, whether or not we are being fair and listening to people, and that we make decisions by centering the affected communities, which also includes the people that run the events. The existing labor source for hosting these events don't have to not participate, not be listened to, be talked over, whatever. They still get to lead and be part of this because they're the ones putting the labor to make the event happen. And that's always going to be valuable and something that we should celebrate. The people that put in the work get a say on over how it's run. We just need to force ourselves to also always bring in the voices and leaders, organizers, and activists from the communities that our events are about. That if we're protesting an issue, the people that are being screwed over and killed by that issue need to be at the table, not just at the table, but they need to be part of the decisions, ideally by consensus, but that's not always, viable. There are different alternatives listed in the Museum of Protests for decision making, and these go well beyond just majority votes and Robert's rules. We can have passionate debate in our movements, but without facilitation, discussion goes in circles or dominated by a few. Effective facilitators guide the process so the group can actually reach decisions and take action. We can do this by setting a clear agenda, keeping the discussion on track, summarizing points, which allows you to affirm, that you are listening to someone and that their whatever statement is valid. It helps people that are also attentive, have differences with attention spans by reaffirming what someone just said. This also helps us with note taking so that we can share notes about our meetings with people that weren't able to make part of it. I know it was a hassle, but set a clear agenda, we summarize points, keep discussion on track, and we sense when consensus for a vote, it doesn't have to be 50% plus one, we can do 60, 70, 80, whatever, when it's ripe, when we can actually decide to decide on how we're going to run things. And anti-nuclear and environmental campaigns, trained facilitators are key to running meetings that otherwise might have derailed the chaos. They can introduce rounds, each person speaks in turn, use consensus decision-making techniques, help activists agree on the plans. Forcing everyone to speak is a way to make sure that we don't keep on doing things in a way that are led by the loudest voices, which inevitably happens, especially happens, I know, even with myself, with a lot of men out there, forged, loud talkers, that there are people that are introverted that might not feel as comfortable speaking up. And by just going person to person to person, we inherently involve them in the process. This is something that we also need to do with our evaluations and our reviews so that we're not basically sending fill out a survey link to our email because that requires going out of your way to participate, like how it weakens activist networks that have to go out of their way for a meeting as opposed to meeting with their workers, with other students in your school, or defining, our organization and its meetings by things that people experience in their day-to-day lives, the ways that we connect, and the ways and systems that we're exploited under. So we force evaluation and input at our meetings, nice, nicely force, by involving everyone. That means we catch issues as they happen. That means we don't let really good ideas fly away or just be ignored. That we involve it all and we strengthen ourselves by bringing attention to when things could have been done better. The group benefits from broad input and stays productive. One guide puts it, facilitation is proactive but not power over. Facilitator doesn't make decisions, they help the group make decisions. This is, as Gans talks about the difference between leadership. Some people see leadership as having a title and running things. Other people see leadership as a responsibility, seeing the people around you get better and stronger, to live their true selves, to stop letting things hold them back, whether it's other people, themselves, assumptions. And disagreements are inevitable. They don't make people, they shouldn't be turned away from. They're always an opportunity to learn. It's how we get stronger. So facilitators can acknowledge tensions, ensure each side is heard, and try to come ground or at least a path forward, like tabling divisive issues for later. For instance, during civil rights movement debates, Ella Baker often took a facilitative role. Rather than imposing her view, she'd listen and ask probing questions to draw out younger activist ideas. Her approach, summarizing what others said and encouraging consensus, helped unify the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee around a bottom-up strategy. She believes strong people don't need strong leaders, meaning the role of a leader is to empower others to lead themselves. It doesn't mean you never give your own opinion. It means they choose carefully when we assert ourselves and when to guide quietly. In practice, many successful leaders toggle between modes, like Bayard Rustin, who in 1953 marched from Washington, had countless planning meetings among organizations. He built consensus on logistics and strategy behind the scenes, but he wasn't afraid to speak out and make executive decisions when necessary. The lesson being that facilitators doesn't preclude stepping up as a decisive leader when the situation calls for it. It's about knowing when the group needs a discussion and needs direction. Active listening, neutral moderation, summarizing and synthesizing, guiding towards decisions. You can do a temperature check just to see where people are in terms of they feel like there's enough agreement before moving on. So that we avoid leaving people with divisions or resentments, which we should never do. We should never let them go home with the bullshit when their lives are a struggle. They face enough of that in their day-to-day lives, like we don't have to do that in our movements. We shouldn't. We always get it out. We can do that by asking people before they leave how things went, summarize the feeling word, one word, literally gut feeling, not an intellectual description of how it went, how you felt. Things that went well, we should keep on doing. Things that could have gone better, that we can fix. This is also seen, conveyed as roses and thorns, like buds and thorns, positives and negatives, something with a triangle too, pluses and minuses. So many different ways of doing this. Do whatever works for you and your community. But we have to do it always. That's the hard part. But once you do it enough times, it isn't painful. The part of the meeting itself. And that will dramatically change how everything happens in our movements if we just listen to people and force ourselves to, by creating the structure, because it's already hard enough to host a meeting. It's too bad to let meetings not to get the most out of their people because we weren't willing to listen to everyone, that we didn't put in the work to make sure voices were heard. That is another reason this is valuable, is it builds the commitment and ownership over the organization, is it almost by default is getting the consent from these people. Managing time and focus in the meeting. We can table it, but we have to be firm about time, especially because working people can't be there in meetings for multiple hours for pointless debate. We have to be willing to get uncomfortable at sometimes, firm, to push people if they're taking us down the wrong path. You should do that in a way that makes them stronger and doesn't look down on them. I want something that I can work on. Having a written agenda, a timekeeper role. Propose time amounts for each item. Practice, you'll get better at estimating. Encouraging quiet voices, gently limiting dominant ones. This is the key role of a facilitator, is balancing this. Does anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to share? That's top top five top five democracy methods. You won't believe what's number three. Working in a small group, so let shy people talk in less intimidating settings, especially when you get more than like 7, 12 people. Round robin, everyone gets a turn. You can always thank someone that's talking too much, suggest hearing from others. You want to do it tactfully without shame, but it's essential for equity. There's no equity if we let people dominate. But to be conscious of power dynamics and work to balance it. Pay attention to your next meeting, who talks the most. Just pay attention to that literal, like the time and space people take up. You'll be surprised. A lot of us don't do this, like pay attention to our own space being taken up until later on in our lives when we've pissed off too many people. Make a goal to invite input from someone who speaks little. They're there for a reason already. They've already bought in. Something is holding them back. We can work around it and make ourselves stronger and our movement stronger. That's how they gain confidence and pitch in more in the future. We need to acknowledge our conflicts and not table them. Set basic respectful ground rules that we're all here for a common cause. You want to reaffirm that in meetings, the beginning of meetings. You also want to end with it. Ideally, you also are ratifying the agenda because sometimes that's set by people, individuals, rather than getting everyone's input because we're so rushed for time, especially in volunteer movements. By setting the ground rules at the beginning of a meeting, you start off with democracy, with making sure people have a say in the decisions, that we can also preemptively deal with problems from the last meeting by creating a specific space for it at the beginning of our meetings. I've seen some, like with Native Organizers Alliance, where they have land the plane. So when someone is talking too much and you're not going to cut them off, but you want them to get where they're going, you ask them to land the plane. Some people have colored like cards, like red, green, blue, or red, yellow, and green, for how much time you have left so you can know if you're actually moderating the amount of time that people are speaking. You need in larger groups. That gets into Robert's rules with the amount of time for debates. But that's not always the best for smaller organizations, especially if you have less than a few organizations that are in your coalition. But it's at the smaller level really worth trying to do consensus. Short break or cooling off periods works wonders. Two individuals are clashing, you might redirect the conversation away from the personal. Track the underlying issue and put it to the group. We have two different strategies towards this issue. Let's evaluate on its merits. If needed, use an outside mediator or dedicate a separate meeting to resolve the contentious issue, allowing the current meeting to move on. Don't shy away from conflicts. Practice it by addressing it calmly. To role-play a scenario with a few activists where people disagree, you practice mediating. Get comfortable with phrases like, let's hear both perspectives fully, or what solution can we all live with? I'll prepare you for real situations. In your current group, how are the meetings run? Who sets the agenda or moderates? The process working well. Identify one change, like introducing a brief check-in round, having a volunteer facilitator, if one person always leads. That might improve the meetings. Because if we do things always the same time the way that we're comfortable with, we limit our ability to change. Because we do what we're comfortable with. We do what we normally do. And that leads to directly how many people are taking part at our meetings, how many people come out to our events, our actions, participate, that follow. The way we run our organizations and movements is largely our success. This is something that We benefit from collaboration as humans, and we can navigate through all of these, whatever issues that we come across. Unlike a lot of things in life where you can do everything right and you can still fail, with movements, it's harder if you're actually doing everything right. We have the structures in place. Figure out how we normally deal with problems. Try to consider a facilitator's mindset. Listen, summarize, and find common ground. Participatory democracy and activism means that everyone affected by decisions should have a say in making that decision. Like mass meetings, decision making, referenda within a group, rotating leadership roles, delegation of authority to accountable committees or assemblies. This approach deeply tied to the values of equality and empowerment. This is a model of leadership that shares power broadly and encourages direct participation in decisions. And a participatory model leadership is not concentrated in one person or a small elite. Instead, it's distributed among the members. And the structures for decision making are designed to be inclusive and democratic. It's called horizontal leadership, or leaderful, as opposed to leaderless, or simply grassroots. The values of equality and empowerment. Now, there's an issue with being entirely horizontal and leaderless, and that's what Joe Friedman talks about in Theory of Structurelessness, where basically if you don't have any rules, the dominant, not just culture, but like a clique will lead everything. It turns into like a mean girl situation. You have to have some sort of structure to ensure that people are able to participate, so we don't steamroll each other. We model what we want to see in the world. Large gatherings where we involve everyone. Occupy Wall Street developed tools like facilitators to moderate with hand signals to quickly show agreement or concerns without interrupting. The structure gave Occupy members a strong sense of ownership. Decisions weren't handed down from the leader, they emerged from the crowd. This can be slow, but it fosters solidarity and creates tactics the group is really committed to. People, immediately write off consensus decision making, but think about when it goes wrong. People are forced to work together to make it work. They're forced to learn about each other's points, especially when someone is effectively vetoing an issue. You have to understand why. Affinity groups, 5 to 15 people, trust each other and discuss issues autonomously. Then they can send a spokesperson to a larger council meeting. Council is composed of these spokes who share the group's input and coordinate collective decisions. It was in the global justice anti-globalization movement around 1999. Thousands of activists in Seattle adopted spokes councils. This decentralizes planning, many small teams working independently, while still achieving coherent large-scale action via the spokes communicating. Notably, spokes are rotating or revocable. They speak for a group but do not decide unilaterally. The structure scales participatory democracy to larger numbers by using indirect representation that remains accountable to grassroots groups. I really think I know Doran Trance with Isaiah in Minnesota really big on affinity groups because it allows people to skip past the harder parts of democracy and organizing and activism, having to deal with people that you don't fully agree with. You can have friend groups, medium and moderate size, run their own situation so long as they're taking part in the overall coalition. There's modified consensus, like 80% to decide if needed, but still going for consensus. For Sunrise, they use combination open discussions and attempts at consensus, but if time passes, they will take a vote to finalize decisions. The key is that everyone can participate debate, and vote rather than decisions being made behind closed doors. Leaderful is having many leaders instead of one. Black Lives Matter was built in a way that be both coordinated and decentralized, avoiding placing all power in one person. Frederick Harris, a scholar of African American politics, noted that while past movements often depended on charismatic male leader, BLM's participatory model means no individual can single-handedly collapse the movement, so it builds strength. The movement for Black Lives broader coalition convened large congress. There were hundreds of organizers deliberated and collectively developed a policy platform in 2017. The process was messy, but it resulted in a comprehensive platform that many groups feel ownership of, the vision for Black Lives. This develops more leaders, long-term capacity, fosters tactical creativity, more innovation, we get more input. Human microphone, which I haven't heard. Repeating speech in unison when amplification was not allowed. Builds commitment and buy-in, embodies the message. When we say we're fighting for democracy, equality, or justice. Practical ways we can create open forums. A regular meeting in person or virtual. All members and stakeholders can attend, voice opinions, vote, and seek consensus on major decisions. And this means we can have a smaller planning committee or committee, but with big decisions being brought to a wider group. We get the nitty-gritty, build small organizing committees, and still make sure everyone is down in our larger coalition. We need to be clear about how decisions will be made in these forums. You might say we discuss until we reach 80%, we can reach consensus, or until 80% of the group agrees, at which point we should move forward. Having the default avoids getting stuck. Ensure everyone understands the process and rationale. We need to train and rotate facilitators that were always available, ready. Use small groups or breakouts. Transparency. With meeting notes, decisions, and proposals accessible to all. Post them online or circulate via email. We can facilitate feedback as we draft ideas, as we probe what might be possible and make decisions. Getting the thumbs up from people really makes a difference. Mistrust grows if members feel something was decided behind closed doors. Even if not everyone can attend every meeting, make sure they can easily find out what happened and voice concerns after the fact. Encourage empower decentralized initiatives. So if somebody wants to do something, we don't have to shut it down assuming that everyone will take part, but we can let them lead their own projects. Just set broad guidelines and trust people. Just check in before going ahead with something. Let neighborhood teams for the environmental justice movement, let those local teams organize their own cleanups or petition drives rather than centralizing every action. Creates a sense of leaderfulness, many leaders working towards a common goal. It amplifies our movement presence, and to keep coherence, we get to hold periodic gatherings where the teams share what they've done and coordinate on larger projects. Inclusive in decision or in deliberation. It's not just formal structure, but culture. Cultivate an inclusive culture by actively inviting marginalized groups' voices into leadership. Make the decision-making processes accommodate different language, ability, and comfort. This is for more well-structured places, but basically you want to always have, a translator for if there's another language being spoken locally and they don't speak English. Especially, also hand sign language. If meetings are dominated by native English speakers, college-educated folks, we can find ways to include others. The Accessible language here just really means simple, which we should all be doing all the time. There's no reason why we need to use like super big words when we're just talking about coming together. Flowery language can be saved for personal writing. South Africa anti-apartheid activists succeeded because they brought together people regardless or across race in mass meetings where everyone could raise issues, mass meetings. They used multiple languages and respected local customs within the democratic structure. An inclusive participatory process will yield decisions that have broader support and understanding, and establish feedback loops. This is such a key thing. See how it's working. And it's dropping. We need to be clear and we need to pay attention and bring up how well things are going in a way that metrics can give us insight and not metrics for the sake of gaming them. There's an issue with Goodhart's Law, which I've heard in the Planet Money podcast, where basically any metric that becomes a target ceases to be a good metric. Like door knocks. The best time to knock doors, technically, if you're just going for high numbers of door knocks, is like 10 a.m. when people just went to work, or midnight, or whatever, when people aren't home, because then you can knock more doors. And for calls, this happens within phone banks within the van by people basically hanging up after a few rings, which can be done to like get more calls done, but also is really clearly just gaming the system, not giving people time to pick up. You also can do this to avoid having to leave the voicemail, but you should really do 5 rings at least. So checking in, how is the attendance at meetings? We should include that at the top of every meeting. This is how many people are here. This is how many people were here last time. This is how things have gone over the past however many meetings. To be able to pay attention when things are going wrong, because then it forces us to talk about them rather than just kind of assuming or not caring. We can't know if people think decisions are too slow or a small clique is taking shots internally without asking. We have to use surveys or listening sessions to get feedback. Participatory models should themselves be adjusted participatorily, meaning involve the group in refining the process. Maybe started with full consensus, but might need two-thirds majority for certain decisions after experience, or maybe a majority voting caused rifts and the group chooses to try more consensus building. Keys remain flexible and responsive so the structure serves the people, not the other way around. Flexibility is also something that we've learned from Hari Han in Prisons of the People, like as the core, one of the core things that make community organizations powerful is that they're flexible, strategic, independent sources of power for using people power. 2021 book by Hari Han, Liz McKenna, Michelle Oyakawa. One of the first academic looks through quantitative research being done for organizing and activism. Educate and orient new members. You don't want to drop people into the process, learning everything. That should hit the vans, which I've definitely caused problems with. But as new people join, orient them to the participatory ethos, let them know how things are done, and that we, supporting people speaking up, explain why it works this way and how they can get involved in it, any materials, training needed, how consensus works, document the group structure. This helps newcomers integrate quickly rather than feeling lost or unintentionally breaking norms. Many movements falter when rapid growth brought new members who weren't familiar with the process. But don't assume people will just pick it up. An informed base, an empowered base. One of the ways to do this that was brought up in Prisons of the People, though, was basically involving new members with older members in small roles in whatever upcoming event, like tabling at a farmer's market. By having some very hands-on, direct ways to help out, that also gives you the time to build the relationships between each other, but it gives you the space to answer the most basic questions of how the organization runs, what you're looking at, what your failures have been, other information about the area. It really strengthens everything when we are building these new bonds between old leaders and members constantly. And that also just gives us people to help achieve whatever action, tabling, whatever that we're trying to do, because it's the norm of involving new people that way and older folks, as in long-term members. Combine strategic leadership when needed. These are not mutually exclusive. Traditional leadership, participatory hybrid model work best. Like a small committee to handle emergency responses or immediate inquiries on behalf of the group so they can react quickly. But that committee is elected and accountable to membership and must report back regularly. Like an executive team. In activism, you might have a spokesperson chosen by the group to help you represent you. They have some leeway to speak or negotiate, but they operate within a mandate given by the group and can be replaced if they stray. Oh, that sounds like a threat. Um, this way you can engage with external actions, media, politicians efficiently without betraying participatory principles internally. So ask, how does your group currently make decisions? Map it out, who's involved, who isn't. Do you have an informal leader, formal committee, or do you practice group votes or consensus? You have to identify the correct model. Does it align with your group values? This is what we just saw. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter about you need to identify what our problems are. And by forcing ourselves to look at the way we make decisions and evaluating ourselves, we catch on to issues more quickly. What is this decision in your movement that you have felt especially satisfied or dissatisfied? Analyze why. Was it because you had a voice in it or reached fairly? Did it lack transparency or inclusion? Reflection can reveal what aspects participatory decision making strengthen or to strengthen. Let's look at what keeps us from it. Meetings might take too long, or people not sure. Bet vote that we have some members prefer having one leader. Let's actually get these concerns from people instead of assuming them. And we think one possible solution or experiment for each, like limiting discussions via time or online voting options, leadership training to shift mindsets. In a horizontal model, how will you ensure accountability? How do you handle it when something goes wrong? Consider the actual scenarios and how we would handle it. The committee fails to do its task where an individual acts against our strategy. A hierarchical model, a boss would reprimand or replace someone. In a participatory model, maybe the group does a formal review or institutes a recall of a representative. Reflect on how your values of fairness and responsibility can be held. Think of a movement you admire. What structure did they use? The Green Belt movement in Kenya, powered a village women's groups to decide when or where and what to plant. Think of a very centralized movement. What seemed to sustain and grow it more effectively? There are a lot of different ways that we can improve our movements, that we can improve diversity and participation, bring people in. Pretty much all of them require us to look at ourselves and what issues we're currently facing. We need to be counting how many people come to our meetings, to our events, finding out why that happened over time, if we had a dip, and figuring out a way to solve it in the future and agreeing with people over it. The best way to do these things is to force it by having it be a part of the structure, by it being normal and like what we normally do, what people are used to, so that it doesn't require effort over time. It's a reflex. So you should always start your meetings by having your community agreements listed and ratifying them. These make sense to everyone. Is there anything else that we should add? And then you can make sure that in our meetings that we try to get participation as many people as possible, especially in a smaller group, but that we moderate and facilitate our meetings instead of letting the loudest voices dominate, which happens in a lot more informal activist movements, places without structure. The loud lead. And at the end of a meeting, always ask people how it went. Their feeling word, a one-word description of their gut feeling. What could have gone better? What went well that we should remember? Our pluses and minuses, our roses and buds and thorns, whatever, positives and negatives. We always give space for this. If it's weird to not do this, then we've made it so that it's self-sustaining, that it's the new norm. that we're always strengthening ourselves and catching issues before they grow out of hand. And by forcing ourselves to center the decisions, the voices that are affected by these decisions, we make ourselves stronger because we pull in more people to offer more perspectives. So we start out with community agreements, we ratify them at the beginning of a meeting. We have facilitators that actually structure things so it's all clear, transparent. We take meeting notes, we send them out. And then when we do actually make decisions, we should try, at least try, to go for consensus, to see what the views are, what's holding people back from the group, addressing it, maybe doing a temperature check to see if everyone's ready to move on, going for a consensus. If they are ready to move on, we can just go along, or we can take an actual vote and try to keep a high threshold, like at least 70%. For coalitions, this is necessary because if you do a simple majority, people are going to feel ripped off, and we need the participation of these different groups. It's not a group of people, it's individual groups whose voices matter supremely. So by having inclusive and active decision making, we can do it these methods. We can force ourselves to get the voices that we need at our events because marginalized voices and affected communities and impacted communities, exploited vulnerable populations, they want to be a part of something when they're being used. And that tokenization of like, oh, we need this voice, we'll get this person, and then they're like repeatedly used as like that voice, that keeps us from growing. It makes the person themselves feel shitty because they're being used, tokenized, for their skin color or whatever, if they have a condition, if they have different nationality or culture or whatever. They don't like that being their defining feature. They want their ideas to be, their actions to be. And by not tokenizing people in that way, by having rotating leadership and rotating speakers, we're able to constantly reach out to these communities, have better relationships. New leaders are raised because people's first time speaking can change their entire life. We kind of owe it to them to have these opportunities, make them accessible so that you don't have to fight and desperately try to have your voice heard. We can practice speaking, we can have everything written out in a Google Doc to make sure the messaging is on point, or we can reaffirm the messaging, bring it up with speakers, and hand that kind of stuff to them when we ask. In early feminist movements, women of color felt voices were marginalized. This taught us to be more intentionally inclusive. This is why you might hear the phrase, there is nothing without us. There's nothing about us without us. That's why a lot of marginalized communities will like not participate in certain movements or organizations because they've been screwed over in the past. They've been used, tokenized, or whatever, and that word spreads. So we have to be vigilant against it by constantly sharpening ourselves, but also just being willing to change. Sometimes, like Saul Alinsky was big on, organizations just need to go away and you need to start a new one. But this inherently happens through coalitions because you're starting something new. Anyways, even if you have these existing groups, coming up with a new structure of decision making, ratifying it, getting the consent that people might feel like was lacking in previous meetings or other events, and you have a fresh start. And that matters a lot for us because we have, as human brains, categorized everything that we come across so that we can not have to memorize everything. It's the only way we keep ourselves sane. We assume these categories and boxes, even prejudices to navigate the world, to know what might be dangerous, whatever, what might be safe, healthy, poisonous. We auto-categorize so much. It Like if you use your phone in bed, your brain is gonna connotate and categorize your bed as an entertainment place, and that makes it harder to sleep in the future. So that's why it's so valuable to have turned off all the screens before you go to bed. Your brain associates it as a sleeping place. And that happens with, if our meetings are held in a certain place all the time, that's where like an issue happens. Having a new spot makes people feel like they're gonna go different. Walking into a new room changes your mood. Entering these new contexts gives us the fresh start that we want, and that's why not just rotating leadership, but meeting spots and other stuff like this can be super valuable, is because it's experimentation. It teaches us that things can be better and keeps us from being stuck in ruts. And as one Indivisible Guide notes, that we must successful coalitions acknowledge past injustices, actively center marginalized voices. This Indivisible Guide notes the voices, experiences, and leadership of those most affected must be central to our work. This might mean ensuring leadership is diverse and that meetings are accessible and welcoming to all identities. This page has a lot more about how to actually deal with the differences, affirming the shared goals, affirming what someone's saying by like, I see and go on, positive body language, no interruption or judgments, phony sincerity doesn't work. And by practicing active listening, we build trust. People are more willing to speak up and more willing to share when an issue is happening. The members of the coalition feel heard. The need for any effective team, and importantly, listening can reveal common ground that wasn't obvious at first. We can also do constructive conflict resolution if we default by seeing these differences as an opportunity to lead. We can always frame ourselves in the mindset of growth and building power instead of division and resentment. Refocus on the mission. Use mediation. Acknowledge emotions are necessary. And you've got to look for win-win solutions. Creative solutions that address the key concerns of the side. Two activist groups disagree on tactics. Perhaps they can agree to pursue parallel strategies than forcing an approach. We don't have to force ourselves in binaries. It's this or that, or our event is going to be this thing and it means all of these. Like we can choose our own path and alter it as much as we want. Sure, some things come with connotations, but we can also innovate and create new connotations. Use different language. Negotiation and coalition should aim to compromise without anyone feeling core values are violated. And sometimes simple resolution isn't enough. The group must strengthen their ability to value each other, build alliances, and find common ground in order to change the systems and support our division. This is called conflict transformation. It takes time and humility. We have to address underlying biases and build trust so that future disagreements are less divisive. This is where we view conflict resolution not winner versus loser, but as a chance to improve understanding and reinforce the coalition. We've probably heard for a way to frame relationship issues as not one person versus another, but them both versus the problem. We need to take that mindset and apply it to our movements and constantly bring that up. It sucks, but we forget. And by bringing it up, we reset our mindset. We go in with better intentions, we're less likely to interrupt, speak over others. We realize that the differences that we're talking about actually make us stronger rather than weaker. It allows us to pull in people that we might otherwise have turned off because we assume that people think the same way we do. Research shows that decisions are better and made faster when they incorporate diverse perspectives. So inclusivity isn't a feel-good slogan. It has real impact on the coalition's effectiveness. Everyone affected by a decision has a voice in making. That includes the affected communities, and the people that put in the labor to make the event work, and then in general, people that attend the events. We can get feedback and evaluations from each of those groups. At the end of our event, we can always do the evaluation, ideally in person, send out the feedback form, should not be our only attempt at getting that because it can be ignored and people aren't going to take part because they know it's going to be ignored, or it just takes too much time, or it requires them to remember to do it when they're already kind of shifting off to something else. But to build that in what we do at the end of events, the end of meetings, and an individual reaching out to organization. And that's more likely for the feedback, the important issues to be raised, if you have a better relationship with the people that you're organizing with. You can't have a better relationship really just by meeting with someone. That would take months for constant interactions. You have to sit down with people and ask them why they got involved, what brought them to the meeting, the cause, the whatever, what makes them care. That usually means including space to hear their story. This can be done honestly in 10 minutes and more intense, active, chaotic electoral campaigns. That's a way shallower uh, discussion. Ideally, it's 70-30 in terms of like 70% the other person talking, they're trying to connect to, and 30% you. People don't remember how you made them feel so much. They don't really remember what you said versus how you made them feel. They don't, they more remember what they said themselves. By allowing the other person to open up and asking them, where are you from? What did you do? You can basically poke around these different areas, get them to share why they're involved, but also for them, not just the stated reasons, but the underlying one. Get to know the real motivations that drive the person, which means that your relationship is stronger. Because you can't ask somebody to take a role or do whatever if you don't know what drives them. I mean, you can, but a lot of the time it's going to fail because you have asked them to do something that's not a fit or given them a weird reason or phrasing. By sitting down, knowing where people were born, how they're raised, what school they went to, why they went whatever line of work, how all of that their story relates to the overall struggle, we also build ourselves the opportunity to connect their story and their struggle to our policy and our work. And I've heard one-on-ones phrased basically two organizers who come together to talk about the paths they've taken on life, to see where there might be opportunities to go together. And that just strengthens us because we don't have to do all this shit alone. We can work together. We can bring in more people, people that we might assume that we're not going to be able to work with. And just giving that opportunity for people to open up can be life-changing for themselves as well. Because so infrequently do people actually get that chance to be listened to. It took me years until I had the first organizer that actually pulled me aside, asked if I had time to meet, asked me why I was involved in the first place, and what I was looking to do or achieve. This gives you the ability to talk about what you want to see in the world, and that makes it more real by it not just being a thought that you had. It allows other people to give input and feedback, which can help you understand different ways of sharing it, different things that could be done better through, but also uh, how you approach it. It just gives you more feedback, more information. It can externalize some of your problems too, not just your dreams. Talking about a trauma, putting it into words, literally turns it into something that is not being just held in your chest. By saying it out loud and seeing people's reaction and verbalizing the words, telling a story about it in our head by a factor of literally just talking about it, we're able to move past it. It's something that happened that we got over. That can itself be therapeutic, and all of these things come together to make one-on-ones the most important thing you can really do to build a stronger movement. And yet they have been missing from so much because we just don't talk about it as organizers. We don't run our movements in a serious, like organizing way outside of big cities or well-organized places. We kind of a free-for-all. There are ways to do this by bringing people in together. And my idea and pitch for Indivisible and also for the Democratic Party is instead of like a 50 straight strategy or like everyone does themselves, goes at it, forms their own chapter, or whatever, we can just model our organizations off who we're trying to influence, which is ultimately Congress. So instead of a 50 state strategy, we can have a 465 district strategy, one for every congressional district in the country, since those are the people we're trying to place pressure on, the people that we can most likely affect. It allows people to inherently channel the pressure from our events, from No Kings, from whatever, towards the people that can actually make the most difference. And we should always have like the space for local stuff and whatever. But if there's three different indivisible groups in a particular congressional district and they're not talking to each other and they're all hosting their own separate events, they're not leveraging the resources that we collectively have effectively, and they're probably damaging their ability to get things done because they're running more of like a clicky way. So by having 465 district strategy, we're not forcing other organizations to stop existing or whatever. We're forcing them to work together to get to be a part of the larger new program. And doing this in a electoral sense allows us to see what it's going to take to actually flip a district. Keep our attention on whoever we're trying to unseat or whoever's seat we're trying to defend, which helps different counties not just work together, but us to learn from each other's strategies and what works in certain areas and what doesn't in others. That extends to the entire movement side of things, where because you're looking at the different congressional districts versus the state, states are very top-down, rigid thinking, but all these districts may have different peculiarities, like different demographics and whatever. You can learn from one in Florida what a district coalition does in Florida when you're in Texas or when you're in another state, or if you're in a red area in California. You can grow and experiment and much more. And this forces us to look at how we're doing metric wise. It forces us to look at the numbers that we're achieving by that comparison, by district, by the geographical boundaries being drawn for us in the congressional maps. We can fix all of these things in all of our movements by just having democratic, inclusive decision making, actively democratic, actively inclusive, going out of our way to always ensure impacting communities are included in decisions, and basically not hosting a meeting if it's not happening. We have to figure out why people are not taking part in our events and be willing to learn and grow and be better. Because none of us are doing this so well that it's achieved so much that it has spread across the country and whatever. Like, we all can do better. We're all being held back by various stuff from our childhoods, the way we were raised, from the cultures that we were around, the dominant cultures in the area, the assumptions that other people make about us, the assumptions that we make about the world. All of these things are limiting factors because we're primates, because our brains are aspect, because we're not computers. So we have to actively prepare and be ready for these assumptions that we all make in the categories that we over assert. We have to stay mindful, which is why Ellen Langer's book, Mindfulness, 25th Anniversary Edition, is included in the Harvard course about organism. It keeps you from making assumptions by allowing you basically not rely on the categories all the time, creating new ones as one of the best definitions of mindfulness, which is creating new categories. By reducing the assumptions, we keep ourselves sharp, we keep disagreements from getting out of hand, we always look for ways to grow. We can solve our movement's issues, we can overcome ice, we can stop the horrible exploitation and abuses that are going on by simply having fairness in the way that we run our operation. By having democratic, inclusive decision making, by making decisions at a 465 district strategy level instead of the free-for-all that's currently going on, that forces people to come together. And because we have stated out loud that we want our movements to be fair, democratic, participatory, it forces to the surface the issues that are underlying and holding us back. It brings people together, it brings communities who might not talk to each other together, and it allows us to evaluate how things are doing by having metrics affiliated with basically all that we do with the amount of people participating in meetings, about to events, take part in the planning, that help out at events, that we reach via our emails and texts and social media posts. All of these things can be basically automated in the way that we operate our organizations and our movement. That can win us the national elections. There's a lot more that we've been doing for the campaign side to be better, to be flexible, to be sharp. But urgently, it can be happening in our movements with no kings, with the 5051 movements, divisible, with that nonpartisan side, the issue-based side. It can actually build enough power that we can force elected officials, members of Congress, who otherwise are luckily avoiding, that are riding under the radar, they're flying under the radar, avoiding the criticism affiliated with our protests because they are not channeling the pressure effectively. This forces all of them to the forefront, all of them to be known by the people who come to our protests. And that being known gives us a chance to make demands of them. We can basically have at the end of every rally, every event, and ask for the entire crowd. We can excite and recruit from at peak excitement instead of via cold calls or emails after the fact. We can take people when they're excited and ask them to step up, have them raise their hands, come to the front of the crowd, get clapped for. We create a social reward that gets people to want to commit because they want to be applauded for. That takes some speaker impromptu speaking, extemporaneous speaking, and ability to manage a crowd because you want to reaffirm why these issues are important while people actually walk up. But then you can ask a smaller ask, lower level. And as you make more of these asks, you increase the amount of pressure because people want to commit to something and achieve the social reward before we stop asking. And this means that we're also forced to bring about clear, defined roles that are accessible and conveyed in simple language so that people know what they're doing, what they're achieving, and that they also finally get asked for the first time in their lives directly to take part. This gives people the kick that they needed, and it means that we're always trying to grow, and it doesn't just have to be in a simple, whether it be elections, door knocking, or other way. People can be pitched roles that actually mean something to them. They can lead smaller teams. They can grow themselves. We can pull more people into the movements. We can grow our union membership, organize new workplaces and industries by asking who might be willing to organize a workplace or learn about labor organizing. This also means that we bring up upcoming events and keep people focused on ways to plug in locally, do the meaningful work that we've been missing, that forces us to not just be symbolic in our protests, our demonstrations, our rallies, but to actively build community power with everything. This is entirely up to us, entirely something that we can do that allows us to build the networks and power that would allow our movement to win. Once we have organizational capacity and rapid response networks in every congressional district, not just that, but the counties, we have local teams and alert systems so that the second agents set foot in a community know. We send out verifiers that can ensure that the information is correct. It's the license plate numbers, description of the vehicles, which helps more people stay out on alert and see them whenever they drive off inevitably to run away. It allows us to send out the whistling teams so that communities that might not be plugged in can know. But we can exploit our social media platforms, the relationships that we all have, that all of the attendees that come to our events have, give them the opportunity to protect their communities by directly working with them to issue alerts when they happen. This makes us tangibly safer. It builds reputation among our communities. It pulls more people into our movements and inherently adds more power to the congressional members that are currently flying under the radar. This sets us up and sets the narrative stage for us to change the leadership of these districts, to elect new people. It also forces more people to run, and for those people who are running and seeking our votes to come out and earn it. Because we are more focused on these congressional districts, we make people famous that otherwise have been luckily ignored. And because of that, we get more people who are willing to challenge them by pointing out the issues, the amount of betrayals that have been happening, and the votes that they make that don't help our communities. There are 1,000 different ways that we could win this thing, that we can make ourselves stronger. And just the way we structure our movement, the way we define what a chapter is, can in itself be the thing that builds us, that allows us to build the level we need to make the demands that can actually be won. And it's entirely up to us. I hope we can make the right decision while we still have enough time before we've been tricked into a state of emergency, whatever emergency powers are given by the administration, or being stuck in the status quo that almost inherently comes with being led by a number of nonprofits that have the legal constraints of being a charitable organization, that have staff at whose jobs are at risk if they shake the vote too much. So this one is on us. We'll see.